The ranch hand's laughter carried across the moonlit corral, and Molly Reeves pressed her back against the barn wall, feeling her chest tighten with an old, familiar ache. She had seen this scene before, in a different life, in a different town. Her father, stumbling home with whiskey on his breath and another woman's perfume on his collar while her mother waited by the window, silent tears tracking down her weathered face. Cowboys were all the same, she told herself. They lived for the moment, for the thrill, for whatever pretty thing caught their eye next. It was 1878, and Wilson, Kansas had become her refuge after fleeing the wreckage of her engagement back in St. Louis, but even here, 300 miles from that humiliation, she could not escape the truth she had learned. Men who lived by the saddle lived without roots, and hearts that wandered never settled. The man she watched now, Xavier Gallagher, was different from the others in some ways. She had noticed that much during her 6 months working at the Wilson General Store. He came to town every Saturday without fail, bought supplies with quiet courtesy, never drank to excess, and treated everyone from the shopkeepers to the washerwomen with the same respectful manner. But he was still a cowboy, still a drifter working the cattle drives that passed through Kansas, still a man whose entire life revolved around movement and temporary camps, and the next job over the horizon. Molly pushed away from the barn and wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. The September night carried the first whisper of autumn, and she had stayed too late at the Harris Ranch helping prepare for tomorrow's church social. She should have left an hour ago, but Martha Harris had needed help with the pies, and Molly had never been good at saying no when someone needed assistance. "Evening, Miss Reeves." She startled, hand flying to her throat as Xavier emerged from the shadows near the fence line. Up close, she could see him better in the lamplight spilling from the barn. He was tall, built lean and strong from years of hard work, with dark hair that touched his collar and eyes that seemed to catch the moonlight. He held his hat in his hands, turning it slowly in a gesture she had come to recognize as his habit when he was thinking. "Mr. Gallagher," she managed, hating how her voice wavered. "You startled me. My apologies. I saw you standing alone and wanted to make sure everything was all right." He glanced toward the house. "It is late for you to be walking back to town. I can manage perfectly well on my own." The words came out sharper than she intended, defensive walls rising automatically. Something flickered in his expression, hurt maybe, but he simply nodded. "I am sure you can. But if you would permit me, I would feel better knowing you got home safely. The road is dark, and there have been reports of wolves coming down from the hills." Molly wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her to maintain the distance she had carefully constructed between herself and every man in Wilson. But the truth was, the 2-mile walk back to town did make her nervous at night, and she had heard the same reports about the wolves. "Fine," she said, the word clipped. "But I do not need conversation, just an escort." "Yes, madam." They walked in silence for the first quarter-mile, nothing but the sound of their footsteps on the packed dirt road and the distant call of an owl. Xavier kept a respectful distance, leading his horse rather than riding, matching his pace to hers. Molly kept her eyes forward, aware of him beside her, fighting the curiosity that wanted to ask him questions, to know more about this quiet cowboy who seemed to defy the pattern she had come to expect. "I know you do not think much of me," he said finally, his voice low and steady. "Or of men like me." She stopped walking, caught off guard by his directness. "I do not know what you mean." "Yes, you do." He stopped too, but did not look at her, his gaze on the dark horizon. "You have been in Wilson for 6 months, and in all that time, you have not said more than a handful of words to me. You are kind to everyone, helpful, always ready with a smile. Everyone except me. I figure I must have done something to offend you, though I cannot think what it might be." Molly felt heat rise in her cheeks. She had not realized she had been so obvious in her avoidance. "You have not offended me, Mr. Gallagher. I simply prefer to keep my associations limited. To everyone but cowboys. To everyone but drifters," she corrected, then wished she had kept silent. He was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke again, there was something in his voice she had not heard before. Not anger, but a deep, weary sadness. "I am not a drifter, Miss Reeves. I own the land adjoining the Harris Ranch, 300 acres that I have been working for the past 4 years. I work cattle drives in the spring and fall because the money is good and I am building something. But Wilson is my home. This is where I plan to stay." She felt the foundation of her assumptions crack just slightly. "I did not know. No reason you should. You made up your mind about me the first day we met, I expect." He started walking again, and she fell into step beside him, her thoughts churning. "Someone hurt you badly. I can see it in the way you watch people, like you are waiting for them to prove you right about how terrible they are. I am sorry for whatever happened, but I am not him." "You do not know anything about me," Molly said, but the words lacked conviction. "I know you came here from somewhere else, running from something. I know you work harder than anyone I have ever met, like you are trying to prove something to yourself. I know you are kind to children and patient with the elderly, and that you cry during hymns at church when you think no one is watching." He glanced at her, and in the moonlight, his expression was achingly gentle. "I know that you are the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, and that I think about you every minute of every day, and that if you would give me a chance, I would spend the rest of my life proving that not all men are faithless." Molly stopped breathing. No one had ever spoken to her like that before, with such raw honesty, such vulnerability. Her former fiancé had been smooth and charming, had said pretty things that sounded like poetry but meant nothing. This was different. This felt real. "I cannot," she whispered. "I cannot take that risk again." "I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow," Xavier said quietly. "I am asking if you would consider allowing me to court you properly, to give me the chance to show you, through my actions, that I am a man of my word." They had reached the edge of town, the first scattered buildings of Wilson visible in the darkness. Molly looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his face that terrified her. Hope. Sincerity. The kind of earnest devotion that could destroy her if it proved false. "I will think about it," she said finally, because she could not bring herself to say yes, but could not bear to see that hope die either. Xavier nodded slowly, accepting her answer without pushing. "That is all I ask. Good night, Miss Reeves." He waited until she had reached her boarding house before mounting his horse and riding back toward his ranch. Molly watched him go from her window, her hand pressed against the cool glass, and wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life, or giving herself the chance at something real. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for the church social. Molly dressed carefully in her best Sunday dress, a deep blue cotton that Martha Harris had helped her sew, and braided her auburn hair into a crown around her head. She tried not to think about whether Xavier would be there, tried not to care about the possibility of seeing him again. The churchyard was already bustling with activity when she arrived. Tables had been set up under the ancient cottonwood trees, and women were arranging dishes while men organized games for the children and set up chairs. Reverend Thompson was directing traffic with his usual jovial energy, his white beard bobbing as he called out instructions. "Molly, there you are." Martha Harris rushed over, her round face flushed with excitement. "I need your help with the dessert table. And you will never believe what I heard this morning." "What did you hear?" Molly asked, allowing herself to be pulled toward the tables. Xavier Gallagher has been asking around about you. Want to know where you came from, whether you were promised to anyone, what your favorite flowers are." Martha's eyes sparkled with mischief. "I think someone has serious intentions." Molly's stomach flipped. "That is ridiculous. He barely knows me." "Well, he wants to fix that, apparently. Oh, this is so exciting. Xavier is such a good man, Molly, one of the best. My James says he has never met anyone more honest or hardworking, and he has been alone on that ranch for so long. It would be wonderful if he found someone." "Martha, please do not start planning a wedding. Nothing has happened." "Yet," Martha said with a knowing smile, "nothing has happened yet." The social began in earnest around noon after the church service. Families gathered under the trees, children ran wild with joy, and the smell of home cooking filled the air. Molly found herself relaxing despite her earlier anxiety, caught up in the simple pleasure of community and sunshine. She was helping serve lemonade when she saw him. Xavier had cleaned up, wearing a crisp white shirt and dark trousers, his hair still damp from washing. He was talking to Reverend Thompson, but his eyes found hers across the yard, and he smiled. Not the smooth, practiced smile of a charmer, but something smaller, more uncertain. It made him look younger, almost vulnerable. Against her better judgment, Molly smiled back. He made his way over slowly, stopping to talk to various people along the way. She noticed how everyone greeted him warmly, how the children ran up to him without fear, how the other men clapped him on the shoulder like a friend. This was not the behavior people showed to a drifter or a troublemaker. This was how a community treated one of its own. "Miss Reeves," he said when he finally reached her, "you look lovely today." "Thank you, Mr. Gallagher. I was hoping you might save me a dance later. The musicians are supposed to start playing after supper." She should say no. Every piece of hard-won wisdom told her to protect herself, to maintain her walls. But standing in the sunshine, with his dark eyes watching her with such hopeful warmth, she found herself nodding. "One dance," she said. "But that is all. One dance is more than I dared hope for." The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Molly helped serve food, watched the children's games, and listened to the gossip of the other women. She learned more about Xavier in those few hours than she had in 6 months. How he had come to Wilson 4 years ago with nothing but a horse and determination. How he had worked every job he could find, saving every penny, until he had enough to buy his land. How he had built his house with his own hands, working through the winter cold and summer heat. How he sent money back to his widowed mother in Ohio. How he had once ridden through a blizzard to fetch the doctor for a neighbor's sick child. How he was known for his fairness and his quiet generosity. It should have reassured her, all these testimonials to his character. Instead, it made her more frightened. Because if she let herself believe in him, if she let herself hope, the fall would be so much farther. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, the musicians tuned their instruments. A fiddle, a guitar, and someone's uncle with a harmonica. The music started up, lively and bright, and couples began to gather for dancing. Xavier appeared at her elbow as if summoned. "I believe you promised me a dance, Miss Reeves." "I believe I did, Mr. Gallagher." He led her to the cleared area that served as a dance floor and placed one hand carefully at her waist, the other holding hers with gentle firmness. Even through the fabric of her dress, she could feel the warmth of his palm, the calluses earned through honest work. They began to move, and Molly was surprised to discover he was a good dancer. Not fancy, but solid and sure, leading her through the steps with quiet confidence. "Where did a cowboy learn to dance?" she asked before she could stop herself. "My mother," he said, and there was affection in his voice. She insisted that all her sons learn properly. said it did not matter if we ended up working the land or the cattle, we needed to know how to treat a lady. How many brothers do you have? Had 3. Lost 2 in the war. Just me and my youngest brother now, and he stayed back in Ohio to help Mother with the farm. The war. It had been over for 13 years, but its shadows still touched everything. Molly's own father had come back from it changed, broken in ways that whiskey could not fix. I am sorry. Thank you. It was a long time ago, but I still miss them. He guided her through a turn, and when they came back together, he was closer than before. What about you? Do you have family? My mother passed when I was 16. My father and I do not speak anymore. That must be lonely. It was desperately lonely, but she had learned to survive it. I manage. You do more than manage. You thrive. Everyone in this town speaks highly of you. Everyone in this town speaks highly of you too, she admitted, and yet you still doubt me. There was no accusation in his voice, just quiet understanding. It made something inside her chest ache. I want to trust you, she said, the words slipping out before she could call them back. But I do not know how anymore. Then let me teach you, Xavier said softly. One day at a time. No promises, no pressure. Just let me show up for you, over and over, until maybe someday you can believe it. The music ended, and they stopped moving, but he did not immediately release her. They stood there in the fading light, surrounded by other couples but somehow alone in their own moment. Why me? Molly asked. There are plenty of other women in Wilson, younger women, simpler women, women who would not question every word you say. Because when I look at you, I see home, he said simply. I see the life I have been working toward. I see tomorrow and the day after and all the days beyond. I see everything I want. It was too much, too intense, too honest. Molly pulled away, stepping back with her heart hammering. I need some air. She fled before he could respond, weaving through the crowd to the edge of the churchyard where the darkness gathered under the trees. She pressed her hands to her hot cheeks, trying to steady her breathing, trying to regain the control that Xavier seemed to strip away with just a few words. She had sworn after Thomas broke their engagement, after she discovered him with that other woman, that she would never allow herself to be so vulnerable again. She had sworn that she would build a life alone, independent, safe from the devastation of betrayal. And here was this cowboy, this impossibly sincere man, asking her to risk everything on faith. I brought you some water. She turned to find Martha standing behind her, holding out a tin cup. Molly took it gratefully, drinking deeply to buy herself time. He really cares for you, Martha said gently. I have never seen Xavier like this. He is usually so reserved, so careful with his feelings, but with you it is like he cannot help himself. That is what frightens me, Molly admitted. What if I let myself believe in this and he turns out to be just like all the others? And what if he is not? Martha countered. What if he is exactly who he appears to be and you miss out on something wonderful because you are too afraid to take a chance? You do not understand. Thomas said all the right things too. He promised me forever, and I believed him, and then I found him with his secretary in our future home, in what was supposed to be our bedroom. The humiliation of that memory still burned. He said it meant nothing, that men have needs, that I should not be so dramatic. Like I was the foolish one for expecting faithfulness. Martha's face softened with sympathy. Oh, Molly, I did not know, but sweetheart, Xavier is not Thomas. You cannot punish him for another man's sins. I know that. In my head I know that, but my heart does not seem to understand the difference. Then maybe you need to let your heart learn, Martha said. Give him a real chance. Not just one dance or polite conversation, but actual time to prove himself. If he turns out to be false, you will know soon enough. But if he is genuine, and I truly believe he is, then you might find something rare and precious. Before Molly could respond, a commotion erupted from the direction of the main road. Raised voices, the sound of horses, and then someone shouting for help. The women hurried back toward the churchyard to find a small group of riders pulling up, their horses lathered and wild-eyed. "Raiders," one of the men gasped, sliding from his saddle. "Coming up from the south. They hit the Peterson ranch, burned the barn, scattered the cattle. They are heading this way." The peaceful social dissolved into controlled chaos. Men ran for their weapons, women began gathering children, and Reverend Thompson called for calm while organizing the defense. Xavier was suddenly there, moving with quiet authority, helping to coordinate the response. "We need to get everyone into the church," he said. "It is the sturdiest building and we can defend it if needed. James, take some men and scout the southern road. Do not engage, just get a count and fall back. We need to know what we are dealing with." Molly found herself swept along with the other women and children into the church building. It was crowded and hot, with frightened voices echoing off the walls. She helped settle the smallest children, telling them stories to keep them calm, while her mind raced with fear. Through the window, she could see the men taking up positions, rifles ready. Xavier stood near the church door, scanning the darkness, his entire body tense and alert. This was a different side of him, harder, more dangerous. The warrior underneath the gentleman. The wait was agonizing. Minutes stretched like hours as they listened for sounds of approach, for gunshots, for any indication of what was coming. Mothers held their children close. The elderly prayed quietly. Molly stood near the window, unable to look away from Xavier's silhouette. Finally, James Harris returned with his scouting party, riding hard. Molly could not hear what was said, but she saw Xavier's shoulders relax slightly. A few minutes later, he appeared in the church doorway. "False alarm," he announced, and the relief in the room was palpable. Turns out it was not raiders at all. The Peterson boys were playing with fireworks they got from a traveling merchant. They accidentally set their own barn on fire and panicked. The cattle scattered because of the noise, and in the confusion, someone thought they saw armed men. Just a misunderstanding, though the Petersons are going to have some explaining to do to their father. Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd as the tension broke. People began filing out of the church, parents scolding children who had gotten overexcited, everyone ready to head home after the disrupted evening. Molly found herself standing in the churchyard, watching the organized dispersal when Xavier approached her again. "Let me walk you home," he said. "Or better yet, let me drive you in my wagon. It is late, and I would feel better knowing you got back safely." She wanted to refuse on principle, but she was tired and emotionally wrung out, and the idea of a long walk in the dark held no appeal. All right. His wagon was well maintained, the horse a sturdy gelding that stood patiently as Xavier helped Molly up onto the seat. He climbed up beside her and set the horse moving at a gentle pace, in no apparent hurry despite the late hour. "You were very calm during all that," she said after a while. "Taking charge, organizing everyone. You have done that before. Served in the war, and there have been a few situations over the years working cattle drives. You learn to keep your head when things go sideways. Were you frightened?" He considered the question seriously. "Yes, but not for myself. I kept thinking about you in that church, and about all those children, and I knew I would do whatever it took to keep everyone safe." They rode in silence for a while, the wagon creaking gently, the stars bright overhead. Wilson appeared ahead, most windows already dark as the town settled for the night. "I've been thinking about what you said," Molly ventured, "about courting me properly." She felt rather than saw his attention sharpen, though he kept his eyes on the road. "Yes. I am not ready to say yes. But I am not saying no either. Could we perhaps start smaller? Conversation, maybe. Getting to know each other without expectations. I would like that very much, Xavier said, and there was such warmth in his voice that it made her chest feel tight. We could start with you calling me by my given name instead of Mr. Gallagher. It feels like there is a wall between us when you are so formal. Only if you call me Molly instead of Miss Reeves. Molly, he said, testing the name on his tongue. It suits you. Soft but strong. He pulled the wagon to a stop in front of her boarding house, then climbed down and came around to help her descend. His hands were steady at her waist, carefully lifting her down, and he held on just a moment longer than necessary before releasing her. Thank you for the ride, Xavier. Thank you for the dance, Molly, and for the conversation, and for not saying no. She smiled despite herself. Good night. Good night. She could feel him watching as she climbed the steps to the boarding house, and when she reached her door and looked back, he was still there, hat in hand, outlined against the starlight. She raised one hand in a small wave before slipping inside, her heart doing strange, complicated things in her chest. Over the following weeks, Xavier proved as good as his word. He did not push, did not demand more than she was willing to give. Instead, he simply showed up. He appeared at the general store on Saturday mornings to buy his supplies and linger to talk with her during slow moments. He sat in the same pew at church every Sunday, 3 rows behind her family, and always found a reason to speak with her after the service. He helped carry heavy deliveries for the store without being asked, fixed a loose shutter on the boarding house because he noticed it banging in the wind, and brought fresh vegetables from his garden to share with her landlady. Small actions. Nothing dramatic, but steady and reliable as sunrise. Molly found herself watching for him, looking forward to their conversations. He told her about his ranch, about the cattle he was raising and the plans he had for expansion. She told him about her work at the store, about the books she borrowed from Reverend Thompson's library, about her dream of maybe one day opening a dress shop. He listened like every word mattered, remembered details from previous conversations, asked thoughtful questions. Why did you come to Kansas? He asked one Saturday in late October as they sat on the bench outside the general store, watching the town go about its business. The weather had turned crisp, and Molly had wrapped herself in her warmest shawl. I needed to start over somewhere no one knew me, she said. Kansas seemed far enough away from my mistakes. What mistakes? By all accounts, you were the one wronged. Maybe, but I chose Thomas. I ignored signs that something was not right because I wanted so badly to believe in the future he promised. That was my mistake, not seeing clearly. Xavier was quiet for a moment, his gaze on the horizon. My father was unfaithful to my mother. Throughout their entire marriage, from what I understand, he would disappear for days, come home reeking of perfume and lies. My mother never said anything, just bore it with dignity, but I saw what it did to her. Watched her heart break a little more each time. I am sorry, Molly said softly. I was 12 when I decided I would never be like him. That if I ever found someone I loved, I would honor them with every breath in my body. That faithfulness was not just about avoiding temptation, but about choosing every single day to cherish the person you committed to. He turned to look at her, his dark eyes serious. That is not just words, Molly. That is a vow I made to myself, and it is who I am down to my bones. She believed him. Somewhere along the way, despite her best efforts to remain guarded, she had started to believe him. It was terrifying. I am afraid, she admitted, of trusting again, of being wrong again. I know, and I will wait as long as it takes for you to be sure. November brought the first snow, light dustings that melted by midday but heralded the harder weather to come. Xavier began making preparations for winter, stockpiling supplies, reinforcing his barn, ensuring his cattle had adequate shelter. Molly watched his methodical approach to everything with growing admiration. He was not impulsive or careless. He planned, he prepared, he followed through. It was during one of these preparation trips to town that disaster nearly struck. Xavier was loading lumber onto his wagon when his horse spooked at a dog running past. The gelding reared, and the wagon lurched violently. Xavier managed to control the animal, but in the chaos, a heavy board fell from the wagon bed, striking a boy who had been standing too close. The child, Tommy Miller, went down hard with a scream. Blood poured from a gash on his forehead, and his mother began shrieking in panic. Xavier was off the wagon in an instant, dropping to his knees beside the injured boy. "Someone get the doctor," he barked, his voice cutting through the chaos with authority. "And bring me clean cloth now." Molly ran into the store and grabbed a bolt of white cotton, racing back to Xavier's side. He took it without looking, tearing strips and pressing them firmly to the wound. "You are going to be fine, Tommy," he said, his voice calm and reassuring despite the blood. "Head wounds bleed a lot, but Dr. Williams will stitch you up good as new. You are being very brave." The boy whimpered but held still, trusting the solid presence of the man holding him. His mother knelt on the other side, crying, but Xavier's steadiness seemed to anchor the situation. Dr. Williams arrived quickly, his black bag in hand, and took over the care. After a quick examination, he declared it looked worse than it was, just a nasty cut that would need some stitches but no lasting damage. As the doctor worked, Xavier pulled Mrs. Miller aside. Molly was close enough to hear their conversation. "I am so sorry," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "This was my fault. I should have secured that load better. I will pay for all the medical care and anything else Tommy needs while he recovers." "It was an accident," Mrs. Miller said, wiping her eyes. "These things happen. That does not excuse my responsibility. Please let me make this right." In the end, Xavier not only paid for the doctor but brought the Miller family groceries for the next 2 weeks, chopped their winter firewood without being asked, and hand-carved Tommy a toy horse as an apology. Watching him take responsibility so seriously, watching him go above and beyond to make amends for an honest accident, deepened something in Molly's heart. This was not the action of a man who would shirk his commitments or blame others for his mistakes. This was integrity lived out in daily choices. Winter settled in earnest by mid-November, bringing snow that stayed and temperatures that made breath freeze in the air. The cattle drives had ended for the season, which meant Xavier was around Wilson more often. He used the time to work on his ranch, to help neighbors with winter preparations, and to court Molly with patient determination. He brought her small gifts, nothing expensive or improper, but thoughtful. A book of poetry he thought she would enjoy. A pair of gloves lined with soft rabbit fur to keep her hands warm on the walk to work. A jar of honey from a farmer he knew who kept bees, because she had once mentioned loving honey in her tea on Christmas Eve. The town gathered for a service at the church. Afterward, families exchanged small gifts and shared warm cider. Xavier found Molly near the refreshment table and presented her with a carefully wrapped package. "You did not have to get me anything," she protested, though her fingers itched to open it. "I wanted to. Go ahead, open it." Inside the brown paper was a beautiful shawl, knitted from the softest wool she had ever felt, dyed a rich burgundy that would complement her coloring perfectly. "Xavier, this is too much." "My mother made it," he said softly. "I wrote to her about you, and she wanted you to have something special. She said any woman who could make her stubborn son smile the way you do deserves something warm for the Kansas winters." Molly's eyes filled with tears. "You told your mother about me. I tell her everything." I have written about you in every letter since September. She says she cannot wait to meet you someday, though I told her not to get her hopes up until you actually agree to let me court you properly." She looked down at the shawl, running her fingers over the careful stitches, and felt something inside her shift and settle. This man had told his mother about her, had shared his feelings with his family, had not kept her as a secret or a temporary amusement. He was treating her with the seriousness of someone who saw a future. "I think maybe I am ready," she said quietly. "Ready for what?" She looked up at him, meeting his dark eyes directly. "Ready to let you court me properly, if the offer still stands." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of joy. "The offer will always stand, Molly, for as long as you need it to. Then yes, I would like that very much." He took her hand, right there in the middle of the church social with half the town watching, and raised it to his lips for a gentle kiss. "You have just made me the happiest man in Kansas." The gossip mill exploded, of course. By Christmas morning, everyone in Wilson knew that Xavier Gallagher was officially courting Molly Reeves, and the speculation about wedding dates was rampant. Molly found she did not mind as much as she would have expected. There was something freeing about letting the relationship be public, about not hiding or pretending she did not care. Winter passed in a blur of carefully chaperoned visits, long conversations by the fire at the boarding house parlor, and stolen moments of hand-holding when no one was looking. Xavier remained scrupulously proper, never pushing beyond what was appropriate, always respectful of her boundaries. But the warmth between them grew, deepened, became something that felt solid and real. In February, a blizzard hit Wilson with unexpected fury. Snow fell for 3 days straight, wind howling like wolves, temperatures dropping so low that water froze solid within minutes. Everyone hunkered down to wait it out, praying their supplies would last. On the second day, Xavier appeared at the boarding house, covered in snow and looking exhausted. "What are you doing here?" Molly demanded, pulling him inside. "You should not be out in this weather." "The Johnsons," he said through chattering teeth. "Their roof collapsed under the snow weight. I helped them get to the church, but Mrs. Johnson is 8 months pregnant and started having pains. Dr. Williams is snowed in at his house across town. I need to get to him. You cannot go back out there. You will freeze to death." "I have to try. That baby is coming early, and without the doctor, both mother and child could die." Molly looked at his determined face and knew nothing she said would stop him. "Then at least let me get you dry clothes and hot coffee first, and take extra blankets." She rushed to gather supplies while Xavier warmed himself by the stove. 10 minutes later, he headed back into the blizzard, fighting his way through waist-deep snow toward the doctor's house. Molly stood at the window, watching until he disappeared into the white, praying desperately for his safety. Hours passed with no word. The storm continued to rage, and Molly paced the parlor floor, driving her landlady to distraction with her worry. Finally, as afternoon faded toward evening, figures appeared through the snow. Xavier and Dr. Williams, supporting each other as they fought their way to the church. Molly did not wait for propriety. She threw on her coat and ran out into the storm, reaching them just as they stumbled into the church doorway. "Is she all right?" she asked, grabbing Xavier's arm to steady him. "Baby is here," Dr. Williams said, his voice tired but satisfied. "A boy, small but healthy. Mrs. Johnson is doing fine." Xavier leaned heavily against the doorframe, his face red from wind burn, his clothes frozen stiff. "I need to get home, check on my cattle." "You need to get warm and rest," Molly said firmly. "The cattle will have to manage for a few hours." She bullied him into staying at the church, where Reverend Thompson's wife had set up a makeshift warming station. She made him drink hot soup. insisted he change into dry clothes someone donated, and refused to leave his side until she was certain he was no longer at risk of frostbite. "You scared me half to death," she said quietly, sitting beside him as he finally began to thaw. "I am sorry, but I could not let them face that alone. I know, that is who you are. You help people no matter the cost to yourself." She took his hand, not caring who saw. "But please, try to be more careful. I cannot bear the thought of losing you." He looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Molly, I love you. I have loved you since the first moment I saw you in that general store, looking at me like I was trouble you did not need. I love your strength and your caution and your kind heart. I love everything about you, and I would walk through 100 blizzards if it meant coming back to you." She should have been frightened by such a declaration, should have pulled away, protected herself. Instead, she found herself saying, "I love you too. I fought it for so long, but I cannot fight it anymore. I love you, Xavier Gallagher." He kissed her then, gentle and reverent, there in the corner of the church social hall with people sleeping all around them and a blizzard raging outside. It was her first kiss since Thomas, but it felt nothing like those had. This felt like coming home. Spring arrived late that year, but when it finally came, it brought a burst of new life and color to Wilson. The snow melted, revealing muddy roads and soggy fields that would soon green up with new grass. Xavier's cattle had survived the winter in good shape, and he began making plans for the spring cattle drive. That was when the first real test of Molly's trust came. "I will be gone for 6 weeks," Xavier told her one evening in early April as they walked along the creek that ran behind the church. "Taking a herd up to Abilene. The money from this drive will let me expand my operation, maybe hire some help so I do not have to leave for the fall drive." Molly felt her chest tighten. 6 weeks. Alone on the trail with other cowboys in towns full of saloons and dance halls and women who would see a handsome man with money in his pocket and see opportunity. "When do you leave?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. "Monday." "I wanted to ask you something before I go, though." He stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Molly Reeves, will you marry me?" Her heart stopped. "What? I love you. I want to spend my life with you. I know we have only been courting officially for a few months, but I have been sure about you since the beginning. I want to marry you, build a life with you, grow old with you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring, simple gold with a tiny diamond. "This was my grandmother's. It is not much, but it is all I have to offer beyond my heart and my promise to cherish you forever." Molly stared at the ring, her mind racing. This was everything she had once dreamed of, everything she had thought she lost the right to want. But the fear was still there, whispering poison in her ear. "How do I know you will come back?" she heard herself ask. "How do I know you will not find someone else out there on the trail, or in Abilene, or decide this simple life is not enough?" Pain flashed across Xavier's face, but he did not let go of her hands. "I cannot give you guarantees about the future, Molly. None of us know what tomorrow holds, but I can tell you that there is no one else for me. There never will be. You are it. You are my home, my heart, my everything. And I will spend every day of my life proving that to you if you will let me." She wanted to say yes. Every part of her wanted to say yes, but the old wound, the old fear, held her back. "Can I think about it while you are gone?" she asked softly. 6 weeks to be sure." She saw him struggle with disappointment, but he nodded. "Of course. I will wait as long as you need. But Molly, please believe me when I say I am coming back to you. No matter what happens out there, I am coming back." He left on Monday morning with the sunrise, joining the other drovers who would guide the cattle north. Molly stood at the edge of town watching the dust cloud as they disappeared, the ring he had pressed into her hand, before riding away feeling heavy in her pocket. The 6 weeks that followed were the longest of her life. She worked at the store, attended church, helped Martha Harris with her garden, and tried not to count the days. But she counted them anyway, marking each one that passed without word, each sunset that brought him closer to return or further into temptation. The doubts crept in despite her best efforts. What if he was like Thomas after all? What if the distance and freedom changed him? What if she had been a fool to believe in faithfulness one more time? Martha tried to reassure her. Xavier is not that kind of man, Molly. He will come back exactly as he left, faithful and true. That is what I thought about Thomas too. Xavier is not Thomas, Martha said firmly. You need to stop punishing him for another man's sins. But the fear was not rational, and it did not listen to logic. It grew in the quiet moments, fed by silence and absence and the memories of past betrayals. Letters helped. Xavier sent 3 during the journey, paying drovers heading back to Wilson to carry them. They were not eloquent or poetic, just simple accounts of the trail, descriptions of the landscape, reassurances that he was well and thinking of her constantly. At the end of each one he wrote the same thing. I am coming home to you. I love you. Wait for me. She read those letters until the paper grew soft from handling, using them as anchors when the doubt threatened to drown her. The 6 weeks stretched to 7. Complications on the trail. Martha heard from another drover's wife. A river crossing gone wrong. Some lost cattle that took time to round up. Nothing serious but enough to delay their return. Molly tried not to panic. Tried not to imagine all the things that could go wrong, all the ways he might not come back, all the reasons she had been right to guard her heart. It was early on a Saturday morning, the first weekend of June, when she heard the shout go up. Drovers coming in. She was at the store, restocking shelves, and she nearly dropped the jar of pickles she was holding. Her hands shook as she set it down, smoothed her apron, and walked to the door with forced calm. The dusty, tired group of men rode slowly into Wilson, their horses as exhausted as they were. Molly scanned the faces, looking for the one that mattered, her heart in her throat. There, near the back, sitting tall in his saddle despite obvious exhaustion. Xavier saw her at the same moment, and his face transformed with a smile so bright it hurt to look at. He dismounted before his horse even fully stopped, tossing the reins to another drover and crossed the street in long strides. Molly, he said, and her name on his lips was a prayer and a promise. She threw herself at him, propriety forgotten, and he caught her easily, holding her tight. He smelled like trail dust and horses and sweat, and she did not care. He was here. He was real. He had come back. I told you I would come home to you, he murmured into her hair. I told you. She pulled back enough to look at his face, searching for any sign of deception or guilt. But there was only joy and relief and bone-deep exhaustion. Tell me everything, she said. Where you went, what you did, everyone you met. I need to know. Understanding flickered in his eyes, sad but patient. All right. Let me get cleaned up and I will tell you every detail of the last 7 weeks. Every mile, every conversation, every single moment. He took a room at the boarding house, bathed away the trail grime, and then sat with Molly in the parlor and talked for 3 hours. He told her about the river crossing that nearly ended in disaster, about the night they lost a dozen head to a lightning storm, about the celebration in Abilene when they finally delivered the herd. He told her about the saloons and dance halls, admitting he had gone into one for supper but left as soon as the working girls started approaching. I was not interested, he said simply. How could I be when my heart was back here with you? One of the other drovers called me a fool, said I was missing out on the fun. But Molly, there is no fun in betraying the person you love. There is no appeal in temporary pleasure when you are building toward forever. She listened to every word, watched his face as he spoke, and felt the last of her fear begin to crumble. "I believe you," she whispered. "You do?" "Yes, I believe you chose me every day you were gone, just like you will choose me every day to come." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the ring he had given her 7 weeks ago. "Ask me again," his breath caught. "Molly Reeves, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said, and the word was freedom and flight and falling into something beautiful. "Yes, I will marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting all this time to find its home. Then he kissed her, there in the boarding house parlor with the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, and it felt like sealing a promise that would last all their lives. They were married 6 weeks later in the Wilson church, with half the town in attendance. Molly wore a dress that Martha helped her sew, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Xavier wore his best suit, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle. Reverend Thompson performed the ceremony, speaking about faithfulness and commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. When it came time for the vows, Xavier's voice was strong and clear. "I vow to love you faithfully, forsaking all others for as long as we both shall live. I vow to choose you, every single day in big ways and small. I vow to be the man you deserve, the husband you can trust, the partner you can depend on. This is my solemn promise before God and these witnesses." Molly's voice shook with emotion, but she got through her own vows, pledging her love and trust and future to this man who had waited so patiently for her to heal. When Reverend Thompson pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her with gentle reverence, and the church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held in the churchyard, with tables laden with food and music provided by the same fiddle player from the social where they had danced their first dance. Friends congratulated them, children ran wild with excitement, and the celebration lasted until well after sunset. Finally, as the stars came out and the lanterns were lit, Xavier helped Molly into his wagon for the ride to their ranch. Their ranch now, their home together. "Are you happy?" he asked as they drove through the summer darkness. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she admitted. "I was so afraid for so long, Xavier. Afraid to trust, afraid to hope. Thank you for being patient with me. You were worth waiting for, worth everything." The ranch house was small but well built, 3 rooms that Xavier had constructed with his own hands. He had been preparing it for weeks, making sure everything was clean and comfortable for his new bride. There were wildflowers in a jar on the table, curtains at the windows that Martha had helped him hang, and a quilt on the bed that his mother had sent as a wedding gift. "Welcome home, Mrs. Gallagher," Xavier said, lifting her across the threshold. Molly looked around the simple space and felt her eyes fill with tears. This was nothing like the grand house Thomas had promised, with its fine furniture and city luxuries. This was better. This was real. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, a coming together of 2 hearts that had found each other against all odds. Xavier was gentle and patient, making sure she felt loved and cherished, and when they finally fell asleep in each other's arms, Molly felt a peace she had not known in years. The first months of marriage were an adjustment. Molly had to learn the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and hard work and isolation from town. But she threw herself into it with determination, learning to cook on the wood stove, care for the chickens Xavier kept, manage the garden that would help feed them through the winter. Xavier was true to his word in every way. He consulted her on decisions about the ranch, valued her opinions, shared his plans and dreams. He helped with the household chores without being asked, recognizing that her work was as important as his. And he was faithful, in ways large and small, choosing her over and over again. In September, when the fall cattle drive came around, Xavier made a different choice than expected. "I am not going," he told James Harris when the opportunity came up, "but the money is good and you have always worked the fall drives. I have a wife now, and I would rather be here, building our life together, than chasing money on the trail. I will make do with what the ranch provides." When Molly heard about his decision, she was overwhelmed. "You did not have to do that. I would have managed while you were gone." "I know you would have. But I do not want to leave you. Not yet, not when we are still learning each other, building our foundation. The cattle drives will always be there. This time with you is precious, and I do not want to miss it." She kissed him, pouring all her gratitude and love into the gesture. This was what faithfulness looked like in action. Not just avoiding temptation, but actively choosing presence and partnership. By Christmas, Molly realized she was pregnant. She told Xavier on Christmas Eve, giving him the news as they sat by the fire in their little house. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for: pure joy, wonder, and a fierce protectiveness that made her feel safe down to her bones. He placed his hand on her still flat stomach with reverent care. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy does not even begin to cover it. Molly, you have given me everything. A home, a purpose, and now a family. I am the most blessed man alive." The pregnancy was not easy. Molly suffered from terrible morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and the Kansas summer heat made her miserable. But Xavier was there through all of it, holding her hair when she was sick, bringing her cool water, fanning her on the hottest days, rubbing her aching back at night. He hired help for the ranch so he could spend more time with her, refusing to let her work too hard. When she protested that she was not an invalid, he just smiled. "I know you are strong enough to do everything yourself, but you do not have to. Let me take care of you. Let me serve you the way you deserve." In late August, as the heat began to break and autumn whispered on the horizon, Molly went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Dr. Williams attended her, and Martha Harris stayed to help, but it was Xavier she held onto through the worst of it. "You are doing so well," he murmured, letting her squeeze his hand until his fingers went numb. "So strong, so brave, I love you so much." Finally, as the sun set on the second day, their son was born. A healthy boy with a powerful set of lungs and Xavier's dark hair. Dr. Williams placed him in Molly's arms, and she stared down at the tiny, perfect face with wonder. "What should we name him?" Xavier asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I was thinking Samuel," Molly said. "After your brother who died in the war, so he is remembered." Xavier's eyes filled with tears. "That is perfect. Samuel Xavier Gallagher. Welcome to the world, son." Those first weeks with a newborn were exhausting and overwhelming, and more wonderful than Molly had imagined. Xavier was a devoted father, helping with nighttime feedings, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Samuel when he would not sleep. Watching this strong, capable man cradle their tiny son with such gentle care made Molly fall in love with him all over again. Life settled into a new rhythm. The ranch prospered under Xavier's careful management. He expanded the herd slowly, never overextending, building a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing. Molly eventually reopened her dream of a dress shop, working from home to make extra money while caring for Samuel. Xavier supported her fully, proud of her skill and business sense. 2 years after Samuel was born, they welcomed a daughter, Emma Rose. Then 2 years after that, another son, Daniel James. Their house grew crowded with love and laughter and the chaos of small children. Xavier added rooms, expanding the simple structure into a proper home. Through it all, he remained exactly who he had promised to be: Faithful not just in avoiding other women, but faithful in presence, in partnership, in the daily choice to show up and serve his family. He was there for every milestone, every crisis, every ordinary moment. When Molly was sick, he cared for her and the children without complaint. When money was tight, he worked harder but never blamed or resented. When she was tired and short-tempered, he was patient and kind. On their 10th anniversary, Molly stood in the doorway of their home and watched Xavier play with their children in the yard. Samuel was 12 now, tall and serious like his father. Emma was 8, full of spirit and mischief. Daniel was 6, sweet and gentle-hearted. They were climbing all over Xavier, who was pretending to be a fearsome bear, roaring and chasing them while they shrieked with laughter. Martha Harris, visiting for the anniversary celebration, came to stand beside Molly. "You were right to take a chance on him," Martha said softly. "I know. I knew it within weeks of marrying him, but it has been proven to me every single day since." Molly smiled, watching her husband let their children tackle him to the ground. "He has spent 10 years showing me through his actions that faithfulness is not just possible but natural when you truly love someone. Do you ever think about Thomas anymore? About what you left behind? Sometimes. But only to be grateful for the path that led me here. If Thomas had been faithful, I would have married him and never known Xavier. I would have missed out on this life, this love. Everything I went through was worth it to end up here." That evening, after the children were in bed, Xavier and Molly sat on the porch watching the stars come out. She leaned against his shoulder, his arm warm around her waist, and felt completely content. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "About the woman I was when I first came to Wilson. So hurt, so certain that I would never trust again. I was determined to build a life alone. And now I cannot imagine life without you. You have given me everything I did not think I deserved. A love built on truth and consistency and daily choice. You made me believe in faithfulness again." Xavier turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I did not make you believe anything, Molly. I just loved you the way everyone deserves to be loved. With my whole heart, my full attention, my complete devotion. That is not special or extraordinary. That is just what love should be. It is special to me. You are special to me." He kissed her, sweet and familiar after a decade of marriage, and yet still able to make her heart race. "I love you, Molly Gallagher. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and joys. Samuel grew into a fine young man who took over more and more of the ranch work, eventually taking a wife and building his own house on the property. Emma became a teacher at the Wilson School, beloved by her students and known for her kind heart. Daniel studied to become a doctor, inspired by Doc Williams, who had delivered him into the world. Xavier and Molly became grandparents multiple times over, their home always full of visiting children and grandchildren. They aged together, their hair going gray, their bodies slowing down, but their love only deepening with time. On their 40th anniversary, Xavier was 72 and Molly was 68. They celebrated with a party that included 3 children, 11 grandchildren, and half the town of Wilson. The ranch that Xavier had built from nothing was now a thriving operation run primarily by Samuel and his sons, allowing Xavier to finally slow down and enjoy his remaining years. After everyone left and they were alone again in the quiet house, Xavier presented Molly with a gift. It was a journal, leather-bound and expensive, filled with his handwriting. "What is this?" she asked. "Every day of our marriage I wrote you a letter. Just a few lines about what I was thinking, what I was grateful for, how much I loved you. I never gave them to you because I wanted to save them, to compile them into something you could keep. This is 40 years of choosing you in writing. Molly opened the journal with shaking hands and began to read. The first entry was dated the day after their wedding. My dearest Molly, I woke up this morning with you beside me and could hardly believe my good fortune. I promise to spend every day earning your trust and proving my love. You are my greatest blessing. Forever yours, Xavier. She flipped through the pages, seeing entries from every stage of their life together. The day Samuel was born, the night Emma had croup and they stayed up all night afraid she would stop breathing, the morning Daniel left for medical school. Ordinary days and extraordinary ones, all documented in Xavier's steady hand, all proclaiming his unchanging love. Tears streamed down her face as she read. Xavier, this is the most beautiful gift anyone has ever given me. You gave me a life worth living, Molly. You gave me a reason to be the man I wanted to be. Every word in that journal is true. I chose you every single day, and I would do it all again in a heartbeat. She set the journal aside carefully and moved into his arms. They held each other in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something lasting and true. Xavier died peacefully in his sleep 3 years later, at the age of 75. He had been out working with the horses that afternoon, still strong and active despite his age. He came home tired, ate supper with Molly, read for a while by the fire, and then went to bed. When she woke in the morning, he was gone, a slight smile on his face like he was dreaming something pleasant. The grief nearly broke her. After 43 years of marriage, of constant presence and unwavering devotion, the silence of his absence was deafening. But she found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the life they had built together, and in the journal he had kept. She read it often in the years that followed, reminding herself of the great gift she had been given. A man who had loved her faithfully from the first moment to the last, who had proven through 4 decades of action that true faithfulness was possible, that some promises were kept, that some loves did last forever. Molly lived to be 83, surrounded by family who loved her and carried forward the legacy of faith and commitment that Xavier had exemplified. On the day she died, she was found in her chair with the journal open in her lap to the final entry Xavier had written. My dearest Molly, we celebrated our 40th anniversary today, and I am overwhelmed by the grace that brought you into my life. I was a simple cowboy with a broken-down ranch and impossible dreams, and you were a wounded woman who had every reason not to trust me. But we took a chance on each other, and we built something beautiful. I know I do not have many years left, but I want you to know that every single one of them has been spent loving you. You doubted a cowboy could be faithful, and I spent a lifetime proving you wrong. It has been my greatest joy and privilege. Forever and always, your Xavier. Their children buried her next to Xavier in the Wilson Cemetery, under a cottonwood tree that had been planted the year they were married. The gravestone read, Xavier and Molly Gallagher. Together in life, together in eternity. A love built on faithfulness. Years later, their great-granddaughter would find the journal in the family archives and read it cover to cover, weeping at the beauty of a love that had endured through everything. She shared it with her own husband on their wedding day, telling him the story of the cowboy who had proven that faithfulness was not just possible but essential, the foundation upon which all lasting love was built. And in that way, Xavier's promise lived on, generation after generation, a testament to the power of choosing love not just once but every single day, through action and devotion and unwavering commitment. He had shown Molly what it meant to be cherished, and she had shown him what it meant to be trusted. Together, they had created something rare and precious in the Wild West of 1870s Kansas, a love story for the ages, built not on poetry or passion alone, but on the steady, reliable foundation of faithfulness proven through a lifetime of choices. Their ranch still stood 150 years later, passed down through the generations, a physical reminder of what two people could build when they committed fully to each other. Visitors could still see the original house where Xavier had carried Molly across the threshold, expanded and updated but fundamentally the same. They could walk the land that Xavier had worked with his own hands, that Samuel and his sons had continued to develop, that now supported the fifth and sixth generations of Gallaghers. The general store where Molly had worked was long gone, replaced by modern buildings. But the church where they had married still stood, and couples still exchanged vows there, promising the same things Xavier and Molly had promised: to love, to honor, to remain faithful through whatever came. Their story became a legend in Wilson, told and retold with each anniversary celebration, each wedding, each time someone doubted whether true love was possible. The local historical society had copies of Xavier's journal, and excerpts were often read at community events, reminding people of what commitment looked like in action. Because that was the real gift of Xavier and Molly's love. Not that it was perfect or easy, but that it was real and lasting. Xavier had understood something fundamental that many people missed: that faithfulness was not about resisting temptation through willpower alone, but about making a choice so complete, so total, that temptation lost its power. When you knew, bone deep, who you belonged to and who belonged to you, when you had committed every part of yourself to that relationship, then the rest of the world faded into irrelevance. He had loved Molly with his whole heart, and in doing so had left no room for anything or anyone else. It was not sacrifice or struggle. It was simply the natural expression of a love that had found its home, and Molly, for her part, had done the equally difficult work of learning to trust again. She had been brave enough to risk her heart one more time, wise enough to recognize genuine devotion when she saw it, and patient enough to let the relationship develop at its own pace. She had not demanded instant proof or perfect certainty. She had given Xavier the space to show her who he was through his actions, day after day, choice after choice. Together, they had created something that outlasted their lives, that blessed their descendants, that served as a beacon for their community. A love built on faithfulness, proven through actions, sustained through 43 years of daily choice. On warm summer evenings, when the Kansas wind swept across the prairie and the sun set in shades of gold and crimson, it was said you could still feel their presence on the old ranch. Not ghosts exactly, but the echo of a love so strong it had imprinted itself on the very land. Young couples would sit on the porch of that original house and talk about their own futures, drawing strength from the knowledge that Xavier and Molly had started with even less and built something that lasted forever. And somewhere in the great beyond, two souls who had found each other in the Wild West of 1878 continued their eternal dance, forever young, forever in love, forever faithful. Xavier, the cowboy who had proven that a wandering heart could settle when it found its home. Molly, the wounded woman who had learned that trust, once broken, could be rebuilt stronger than before. Their love had been tested by doubt and distance, by hardship and loss, by the simple daily challenges of building a life together in a harsh and unforgiving land. But it had endured because they had chosen each other, not just once in a moment of romance or passion, but over and over again in the quiet, unsexy moments that made up a life. When Xavier had comforted Molly through morning sickness at 3 a.m, when Molly had stayed up all night nursing Xavier through a fever, when they had worked side by side in the garden in the brutal summer heat, when they had sat together in silence after losing a pregnancy before Emma was born, when they had celebrated their children's successes and grieved their failures, when they had faced lean years and abundant ones, when they had been young and strong and when they had grown old and frail, through it all, the faithfulness had remained. Not as some abstract concept or high ideal, but as a living, breathing reality expressed in 10,000 small actions. The way Xavier always kissed Molly goodbye before leaving the house. The way Molly always had coffee ready when Xavier came in from morning chores. The way they held hands during church services. The way they made time for conversation even when exhausted. The way they defended each other to critics. The way they celebrated each other's victories. The way they bore each other's burdens. This was the true legacy of Xavier and Molly Gallagher. Not wealth or fame or dramatic romance, but the quiet, revolutionary act of keeping their promises. In a world where so many people broke their vows, they had kept theirs. In a time and place where infidelity was often excused or ignored, they had built a relationship based on mutual respect and devotion. In a culture that often treated marriage as a business arrangement or a temporary convenience, they had created a partnership that honored the sacred nature of their commitment. And because they had done this, because they had lived their love so fully and faithfully, they had changed the world around them. Their children had grown up seeing what healthy love looked like and had built their own marriages on that foundation. Their grandchildren had received the blessing of stability and security that came from having grandparents who adored each other. Their community had been enriched by their example, had seen proof that lasting love was possible. The ripples of their faithfulness spread out in ways they never could have anticipated. Samuel's marriage, strong and stable because he had seen his parents' example. Emma's teaching, informed by the patient love she had witnessed at home. Daniel's medical practice, marked by the kind of compassionate presence his father had modeled. And beyond their immediate family, all the couples who had drawn inspiration from their story, who had chosen to fight for their own relationships because Xavier and Molly had shown it was worth fighting for. This was what faithfulness looked like when lived out over a lifetime. Not a single moment of heroism or sacrifice, but 1,000 small choices that added up to something magnificent. Not the absence of difficulty or temptation, but the consistent decision to honor the commitment regardless of circumstance. Xavier had spent his entire adult life proving to Molly that a cowboy could be faithful, that a man's word could be trusted, that promises made could be promises kept. And in doing so, he had not just won her heart, but had transformed her understanding of what love could be. She had entered their relationship, convinced that faithfulness was impossible for men like him, that her doubts were wisdom born of experience. She had been certain that disappointment was inevitable, that betrayal was just a matter of time. And he had spent 43 years gently, patiently, lovingly proving her wrong. Not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through the steady accumulation of trustworthy actions. He had shown up when he said he would. He had kept his promises, small and large. He had chosen her over every other option, every single day. He had loved her in the ways she needed to be loved, had learned her heart and served it faithfully. He had built a life with her that was exactly what he had promised it would be, and Molly, in turn, had given him the gift of her trust. She had been brave enough to hope again, to risk again, to love again. She had let him prove himself instead of condemning him for crimes he had not committed. She had been patient with his imperfections while appreciating his genuine devotion. She had built a partnership with him based on mutual respect and shared dreams. Together, they had shown Wilson, Kansas, what marriage could be when both partners were fully committed. They had raised children who knew what it meant to be loved unconditionally. They had created a home that was a refuge and a haven. They had built a legacy that would outlast their mortal lives, and when the end came for each of them, they had gone peacefully, secure in the knowledge that their love had been real and true and lasting. Xavier died knowing he had kept every promise he had ever made to Molly. Molly died knowing she had been cherished every day of their marriage. There could be no greater success than that. No accomplishment more meaningful than a life lived in faithful love. No legacy more precious than children and grandchildren who had seen what commitment looked like and carried it forward into their own lives. The Wild West had been a hard place, full of uncertainty and danger and difficulty. But in the midst of that harshness, Xavier and Molly had created something beautiful. They had taken their individual wounds and dreams and built something together that was stronger than either could have achieved alone. And their story, preserved in Xavier's journal and the memories of their descendants, continued to inspire long after they were gone. It reminded people that real love was possible. That faithfulness was not naive or unrealistic, but achievable with the right person and the right commitment. That a lifetime of small, consistent choices could create something extraordinary. She had doubted a cowboy could be faithful. He had spent a lifetime proving her wrong with actions. And in that proving, in that patient demonstration of devoted love, they had built something that transcended their individual lives and became a gift to everyone who heard their story. This was their happily ever after. Not perfect or easy, but real and lasting and true. A love story from the Wild West that proved the greatest adventures were not found in distant lands or dramatic exploits, but in the daily choice to love one person faithfully for a lifetime. And so their story ended where all the best love stories end, not with a dramatic climax or uncertain future, but with the quiet satisfaction of promises kept, love honored, and a life well lived together. Xavier and Molly Gallagher, faithful to each other and to their vows, from that first uncertain dance in 1878 to their final rest in the Kansas soil, they had worked together for so many years. Their love had been tested and proven, doubted and demonstrated, questioned and confirmed. And in the end, it had endured, a testament to the power of faithfulness lived out in action, one day at a time for a lifetime.